Hey, 42 here. As another steamy dawn broke over a Georgian London in 1790, an unassuming but marvellous inventor proudly placed a new feature in his shopfront in 124 Piccadilly. It was a black wooden plaque inscribed with beautiful golden hand lettering that read, "The artist who can make an instrument that will pick or open this lock shall receive 200 guineas the moment it is produced." At the top of the board was mounted a circular iron padlock and the item with which security lived and died. This was a challenge to all passers-by. Whoever could successfully pick this lock would be awarded 200 guineas, worth over £20,000 today. Its creator was so confident that he had produced the world's first totally unpickable lock. Joseph Brammer was born on a farm in Barnsley, Yorkshire, but his fascination for invention and the newly born field of mechanical engineering brought him to London. He started out his career making cabinets and an improved water closet, which overcame a perennial issue that many wealthy loo owners in London were having. The water in the toilet froze in the colder months, which led to some unfortunate side effects. Brammer's new water closet design, which he created with his boss, Mr. Allen, was so successful that it was produced for over 100 years, until more modern designs arrived in the late 19th century, when a certain Mr. Crapper came along. Brammer's water closet was even supplied to Queen Victoria, and a working model can still be found in her most favourite residence, Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. Brammer also invented the hydraulic press, so you can thank him for the countless hours you've spent watching various household objects being obliterated on YouTube. He also drew up plans for an early fountain pen, invented the beer engine which allowed beer to be pumped up to the taps in the bar, and thus the kegs could be kept in the cool cellar below. And he invented the first machine that allowed banknotes to have a unique sequential number printed on each one. Quite the incredible inventor he was, but it was a foray in the 1780s with which Brammer left his most famous legacy. He attended a series of lectures on locks and became obsessed with them. In 1784 he started the Brammer Lock Company at 124 Piccadilly, where he would design, manufacture and sell his own proprietary locks. Locks up to this point were absolute shite. Amazingly, the first pin and tumbler lock, where a key must raise bolts to a very specific height, freeing the barrel so that it can freely rotate and unlock, the basis of the same design we use today, were first created 6,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. They were constructed from wood, and as remarkable as this was for the time, they were predictably unsecure. The Greeks and Romans built on this technology very slightly, but since the 1st century until the 18th century, absolutely no progress was made at all on lock design. For thousands of years, locks were painfully simple to pick. They could indeed be picked with a single wooden stick. They were so easy, in fact, that during the Middle Ages, security consisted of creating a series of fake keyholes on doors, with the hope that the would-be lock breaker would try the wrong keyhole first, then just give up and go home. Seriously. Joseph Brammer set out to create the world's first unpickable lock. But there was good reason why no such lock yet existed. Engineering up to this point was incredibly imprecise. All parts were hammered out by hand, then filed down to the appropriate size and shape. This meant that if a factory produced 100 iron door handles per day, then each one would be of greatly different dimensions and each would have their own unique imperfections. This imprecision impeded the improvement of very small mechanisms such as locks. Actually, it is a testament to the great imprecision of engineering in the mid-18th century that the word mechanism was only now coming into existence. Luckily for Brammer, he employed an 18-year-old assistant in his workshop who would soon go on to change the world. Henry Maudsley. Maudsley was a bright and highly inquisitive young man who, working with Brammer, invented the world's first machine tools. That is a machine that can create very precise parts for other machines by cutting, boring, grinding, or shearing metals. One of the most influential and useful of Maudsley's machine tools was the metal lathe, which enabled the production of standardized screw sizes and interchangeable parts. Without Maudsley's innovations, mass production and the Industrial Revolution would not have been possible. Almost every single item in your house and on your driveway today would not exist. But that's a story for another time. This video is about Brammer. Brammer used the new machine tools he and Maudsley had created to design and mass produce a new series of Brammer locks to sell in his shop for discerning Londoners in need of better security. The locks all had interchangeable parts and were so precisely machined that apart from the lock combination, no two were different, which, although very normal today, at the time was groundbreaking. Brammer's locks employed a patented design with a cylindrical barrel and a number of wafers, tiny slices of spring-loaded metal that would push themselves into the centre of the barrel. Only when the correct tubular key was inserted, pushing the wafers outside of the barrel, could the lock rotate and thus open. Brammer took his lock design and created one particular lock with 18 wafers, meaning that there were 470 million possible permutations for the wafers, and only one of those could open the lock. This would be his challenge lock that he placed proudly in his shop window, so secure he thought that no man alive or tool could pick it open. And he was so confident that he was willing to put 200 guineas on it. Many tried. Many expert locksmiths from the world over, and laymen alike, took up the challenge. But its extremely numerous 18 wafers and its tricky, tubular design fooled even the very best. It quickly grew in fame, and the world's media reported on the world's first unpickable lock. It would appear that the idea of perfect security, a security system that cannot be breached, had been achieved. In fact, by the time Joseph Brammer died, aged 66, the lock still remained stoically unpicked, at which point his children took over his business. It would be almost 70 years since its carnation that the Brammer challenge lock would meet its match. The British government, particularly its various security divisions and its prison service, were intensely interested in Brammer's lock, but they had an added requirement for an unpickable lock. They wanted a lock that could alert the owner if a picking attempt had been made, so any attempted break-ins at various government institutions could be detected. The British government was so eager to acquire such technology, especially after a Portsmouth dockyard was burgled in 1817, that they held a nationwide competition, offering a £100 reward, £8,000 today, for anyone who could invent such a lock. A year later, a man named Jeremiah Chubb stepped forward to claim the reward. He had invented what he named the Chubb Detector lock. It was reportedly both unpickable and would also alert the owner to an attempted break-in by jamming itself during a picking attempt. And after it had been jammed, it could then only be unlocked, even by the owner, by first resetting the detector mechanism with a special regulator key. The British government were impressed, but they wanted to test its real-life effectiveness before employing the Chubb detector lock across the country. So they came up with a rather unconventional test. They gave the lock to a prisoner in Portsmouth, who was considered a leading expert in lockpicking. He was a locksmith by trade and had been able to pick every single lock he had ever come across. If he could successfully pick the lock, the government were prepared to release him from prison and give him £100. The man's freedom was quite literally at stake. He tried tirelessly for 3 months in his cell, but could not pick the detector lock, and he threw in the towel. So impressed with the British government that the Chubb detector lock became the de facto industry standard lock for Britain and was used in prisons, post offices, government buildings, and by hundreds of private corporations. With the Chubb detector lock and Brammer's challenge lock, it seemed the world had 2 unpickable locks. That was until the Great Lock Controversy of 1851. The Great Exhibition, the world's first international show of technology, organised by Queen Victoria's husband Albert, was held at the specially built Crystal Palace in Hyde Park in October of 1851. New technologies from every corner of the earth were on display. Amongst all the spectacles on exhibit were Brammer's challenge lock, which by this point had gone unpicked for 67 years, and the Chubb Detector lock. A pioneering American locksmith and lock salesman, Alfred C. Hobbs, made a special trip on a steamship from Washington to sell his own products at the London exhibition, but secretly, he had another more alluring motive. He had come to be the first man to pick the unpickable locks. Upon arriving at the Great Exhibition, Hobbs remarkably managed to pick the Chubb Detector lock. He did this by repeatedly tripping the detector mechanism and then picked it again to reset the mechanism. Each time he did this, he learned more and more about how the device worked until he was eventually able to open the lock itself using basic lock-picking tools. Hobbs then picked it again in front of a fascinated crowd in only 7 minutes. And with this, the belief in the impenetrable security of the nation had evaporated. But for Hobbs, this was only a warm-up act. The true prize was the 67-year-old unbreakable challenge, the Brammer. So important to the government, Joseph Brammer's children's business, and the idea of true security to the entire world was the imperviousness of the Brammer challenge lock that a committee was set up to determine rules for Hobbs' attempt. The rules were as follows. Hobbs had 30 days to attempt the challenge. The lock was affixed to a wall to limit access to only the keyhole and the hasp. The key was to be locked away during the attempt. Whenever the lock was left unattended, the keyhole was to be covered by an iron band. If Hobbs was successful, he had to prove that the key could once again lock and open the padlock to prove that he hadn't opened it through damage. Hobbs would have to carry out the attempt in a room above Brammer's shop, and a moderator would periodically check in on him. This was obviously a serious affair, and much more than 200 guineas were at stake, and Hobbs was taking it seriously. He had brought with him specially made tiny mirrors, so small they could fit inside the keyhole of the lock, and diamond tools. Over the next 16 days, and a total of 51 hours, Hobbs slaved away to pick the unpickable. And on the 23rd of August 1851, the short age of perfect security ended. Hobbs had picked open Brammer's lock without any damage. The event has gained the name the Great Lock Controversy of 1851 because the committee's initial thoughts were that Hobbs had completed this challenge in such a controlled environment over such a prolonged period that it was entirely unrepresentative of a real-life burglary. They were not pleased. Yet the 200 guineas were begrudgingly handed over. But with it, they also handed over the end of a time when a man could put a lock on his front door and feel safe in the knowledge that nobody could get in, at least not without brute force. There has never again been a lock that has remained unpicked for so long. Even the most cutting-edge locks today are unlikely to last a fraction of the time as Brammer's. I've recently launched my first book, which I'm crowdfunding. Stick a flag in it, 1,000 years of bizarre history from Britain and beyond. The crowdfunding campaign has reached 100%, so it's definitely going to be published. Thanks to everyone who has pledged. But there are still stretch goals to reach. So, if you want a first edition signed copy, then head on over to Unbound, the link's in the description, watch the launch video if you haven't already, and pledge today. Thank you.